Basically, that's the reason that was given that fire dissolved that because of having a very inappropriate understanding. I mean, because of their failure to agree on the appropriate approach that they would use to get their country out of the very big debt. Now, that was the internal factor. Now, the other internal factor we can talk about that these are all young people. They are all young people that took over leadership in one of the greatest or one of the oldest states in West African countries. Definitely a little bit of egocentrism, a little bit of their ego. None of them was willing. We should be in position to look at this very arrangement with what happened in Congo. When Felix Tshisekedi became the president of Congo, one of the people that so much supported him was Joseph Kabila. Actually, facts have it that Tshisekedi was almost not even number one. He wasn't even number two, but he was number three. Now, because of the influence of Joseph Kabila, they did a lot of influence and influenced on the side of the Catholic Church. Felix Tshisekedi was in a position to be elected or declared a winner, of course with the support from other neighboring East African countries, including Uganda. Now, when Felix Tshisekedi became a president, Joseph Kabila thought that he would always influence him. You know what happened very last year? That Joseph Kabila was declared a persona non grata. Joseph Kabila was declared that he's wanted. Is wanted. Actually, a resolution was passed, a sentence was passed that's supposed to serve life sentence. Actually, it was so much involved, accused of giving a lot of support to the M23 rebels that are destabilizing the government in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, this was Felix Tshisekedi trying to talk to Kabila. That you might have been in a position to let me come and win, but now I'm the president, the legitimacy or the mandate of manning this country is in my hands. So that is a very big challenge that so many leaders have. In other words, it's a little bit very difficult to have someone that supported you and then continue influencing you, because they will never see you as a leader. They always see you as someone who is behind them. Now, the other factor that is in play, we are talking about the region that is within the Sahel. The Sahel region has been very unstable. We've always been talking about Niger here. We've been talking about Mali. We've been talking about Burkina Faso. Now, in that very region, we should be in a position to talk about Guinea, and then you should also be in a position to talk about Benin. All those countries have had military coups. The one in Niger was successful, one in Mali was successful, one in Guinea-Bissau was successful, the one in Burkina Faso was successful. It was only one in Benin that was so much involved and disturbed by the emergence of Nigeria and under the leadership of Bola Tinubu that came in and reinstated the government that had been so much taken over, top or down. Now, in that very region, you don't have to forget that in the past 3 weeks, there has been a very, very serious challenge in Mali. Now, in Mali, there was a very big challenge where even the Minister of Security, Sadio Kamara, was eliminated. Now, when Sadio Kamara got eliminated, the only country within the West African countries that came to give support, or within the ECOWAS, we talked about the ECOWAS here, and we said the ECOWAS refers to the economic... we talked about the ECOWAS here, and we said this is a very big body that is supposed to help the economic market of West African states. That's the ECOWAS. It brings together all West African countries, of course, including Nigeria, Ghana, and almost Ivory Coast, Senegal, and others. And we said that they also have an army called the ECOMOG. Now, irrespectiveness of all those abilities, when Mali was under insurgencies, when Mali was fighting the government of when the government of Mali was fighting against the insurgencies, we didn't have any power that came to support. The only power that came to support Mali under Assimi Goïta, that was Senegal. Now, why did the Senegal come? It came in rather because of the declaration, and because of the values of the PASTEF. We say that PASTEF is a political party that so much stood on the values of Pan-Africanism. Now, one of the biggest perpetrators of this is Sonko. Sonko, the prime minister, was very influential in ensuring that the army of Senegal comes in and offers support to Mali. Now, Faye, the president, was a little bit very inconsistent. He didn't so much want to see his country get involved into the affairs of Mali. Actually, he was very, very vocal and he spoke not so good about it. Now, the prime minister, he was in a position to use his powers and use his authority to ensure that he promotes Pan-Africanism by ensuring that he extends a hand of support or a helpful hand towards the neighbors that were being taken away by the insurgencies and the leadership of the Tuareg. Now, that is something that made Faye a little bit very insecure, because if the prime minister can have the command over the army and then he can command them to go and do or execute a foreign mission, that made him a little bit very, very unreliable. I mean, that made him a little bit very scared on the influence of the prime minister. That's one of the biggest reasons. And then you also don't have to forget, you know, when when Senegal comes in to offer support to Mali, that very country, that very region, the West African region or the Sahel region, has been so much taken up by the French, and the French have been sent away. That is what accounts for the involvement or the merger of Emmanuel Macron into West Africa, East Africa. 2 weeks ago, actually last week, we were in a position to talk about a story where all African leaders, most especially from the West African countries, were invited in Nairobi in a summit that came to be known as the Africa Forward Summit. That summit that was called by Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, meaning that France is looking at East Africa as the possible alternative after their failure, after losing out of almost 60 countries in the West African states. Now, if Senegal is still one of the countries that is still under the control of the French in a way of exploitation and doing business and at various levels, it becomes a little bit hard for them to see any other country turning out to join what you call the Triumvirate. The Triumvirate, I'm referring to the three leaders. That is Assimi Goïta in Mali, Ibrahim Tchemani in Niger, that is Niamey, and then we come to Ouagadougou or Burkina Faso, that's Ibrahim Traoré. It becomes a very, very, very big challenge. So France doesn't want any other Burkina Faso, any other Mali, any other Niger within the West African states. That's why allegedly they were in a position to put pressure as well on Faye to ensure that they don't so much get involved in giving support to Mali. You also don't forget one of the biggest powers that is very influential in that very region is Germany. Germany is also very influential. Germany has embarked on a lot of architecture projects within Senegal and most of the West African countries, definitely because of the resources that they have in there. So the point today that we are trying to emphasize is a leadership that has come to an end. This was Bassirou Diomaye Faye, the president of Senegal, led to a dissolvement of the government where his colleague, his long-term friend, his prison mate, because they were all locked up in the same prison, they worked together for the URA, for the Tax Collection Authority in Senegal. That very background, they were brothers that ended up. Now, there was something that was very amazing as well. When the prime minister was sacked, he was received with a lot of vigor and a lot of energy at his home ground. When he went back home, it was like a homecoming. It was like they were receiving someone. Now, the question is very simple. What is the future of Senegal in this very area? The future of Senegal is going to so much determine what is going to happen in the West African countries. The future of Senegal is going to be so much determined. Don't be surprised when we see another coup in that very country. Because like we've said, Sonko is more influential, or was more influential. Just the fact that Faye has legitimacy, but when it comes to the influential in terms of the politics, Sonko is far much more powerful compared to Faye. So don't get surprised. We see a little bit of some uprising in there. And the approach of Sonko is very vocal. Sonko is very tough. Sonko is a very strong, strict Pan-African. So we don't seem to see him just giving up on each and every arrangement that was planning to do, most especially when the Sahel or the West African countries are under siege by the French masters. So that's what happened in Senegal. The government is no more. By the end of this week, we believe that Faye will be in a position to design or declare a new government that will be in a position to take over leadership in Dakar or in Senegal going forward. In another story, we shall move to the United States. Now, in the United States, the White House was attacked again. the White House was attacked again for almost. Actually, it was not the White House. This time it was the White House. But President Donald Trump has been attacked. I think this was the 4th time. President Donald Trump has had assassination attempts. Now, this was another assassination attempt towards the President of the United States, that is Donald John Trump. Now, over the weekend, Donald Trump was supposed to attend his son's wedding, Donald John Trump Jr. His son was supposed to have actually wedded. Donald Trump was supposed to attend this wedding. But after some time, everyone got to realize that Trump was in a position to say that I am not going to attend my son's wedding because I need to go back and attend to some issues. Now, most of the biggest people in America were seen moving towards Washington. Of course, because of a very big situation that they will not be in a position to declare. While at the White House, a gentleman, a very young man of around 21 years, attacked the White House. And they say there was a very serious attempt to the assassination, to ensure that the President of America gets assassinated. Now, this gentleman was arrested and he was also shot on spot. Now, this came after a lot of issues. Actually, if you happen to follow this story, there are so many news agencies that we are going to capture what was happening at the White House, and then almost 28 bullets were shot, 28 rounds were shot from the different people. Everyone, by the secret agency, the Secret Service, that is the corporate organization that protects all big people in America, including the American presidents. So there were so many rounds that were shot. People are calling it a stunt and all that, but the gentleman who was in this attempt was captured and he was a little bit profiled. And when profiling him, they got to know that he has had a little bit of some mental disorders. He's a sick man of around 21 years, attempted to seriously have a serious attack on the assassination of the American president at the White House. Now, this is almost the 4th time Trump has an attempt against the President of America has been made. You do not forget, actually, I think it was 2 weeks ago, again, when Donald Trump was in a position to host what we call a correspondence dinner. Now, a correspondence dinner is a dinner where a president invites all reporters from different media houses, and then he gives them, they have a little bit of a conversation, they get him roasted. They have issues about what's happening and what they've been in position to report. Now, on this very occasion, still, there was a gentleman that attempted to assassinate Donald John Trump. Actually, on this very occasion, the vice president was in presence. That's J.D. Vance, and even Trump and his wife. He was also in presence. So that footage moved, had a lot of rounds where Donald Trump was in position to get lifted, but because of his old age, it was taken not in a very, very good way, most especially when he didn't want to go minus moving with his wife, that is Melania. But of course, the first person that they were in position to take away was J.D. Vance, the vice president. Now, that was the second attempt. Now, that was a little bit very serious because people are asking themselves, how can someone move close to such a guarded premises? Because the security or the security of the American president is very, very, very profiled. The people that they have on the presidential detail are very, very special people. They are seriously trained. So how can someone have a little bit of that gap to ensure that the president of the biggest country on this planet gets that kind of attack? You don't have to forget as well that during the campaign trail, Donald Trump was shot at. Actually, the bullet shot him at his right or left ear. Something that so much shot him during the campaign trail. Now, people asking themselves that what is really happening? Why Trump? We've not seen any American president of late that has gotten a little bit at an assassination attempt, apart from JF Kennedy. JF Kennedy was shot in 1963. 1963, I think November. That's when he got shot. He was shot. He was an American president. By then, he was the only Catholic that has ever led the United States of America. He was shot in Dallas. He was shot in Dallas or Texas, one of those states. He was shot in 1963 when he was planning to start his campaign for the second term, because he took over leadership in America from 1960 up to 1963. So towards the end of 1963, he was planning to get himself re-elected to come and take over leadership again, but he got shot. He got shot in an, in an open car, in a convertible. That is the only president that has been shot in that time. But you don't have to forget that as well in 1865, Abraham Lincoln was shot. Abraham was shot by a gentleman called John Wilkes Brooks. He shot him. Abraham Lincoln was in theater, was in a theater, and then he was watching some drama going on. Then someone came and shot him at the back of his head. So that those are the two American presidents that have, I don't want to say successfully, that have been killed or assassinated while in office. That is Abraham Lincoln, 1865, and again and then Jenny Fitzgerald Kennedy, or Jeff Kennedy, who was shot in 1963. Now, we've not had any president that has had an attempt. Maybe Bush. Bush had an attempt in 1963, in 2002, 2001, when he visited the American forces in Iraq. So a young man, one of the soldiers, shot him. Actually, he didn't shoot. He threw a military boot at his right hand, and he got some injury on his right hand here. But for Trump, this has been the third attempt officially. It has been the third attempt. One, when he was campaigning. Two, after taking over the government fully. What is really happening with Donald Trump? People asking themselves, what is really happening with Donald Trump? But you also don't forget that amidst this all circus, amidst all this saga, there was also an attempt that was declared over his daughter, Ivanka Trump. Ivanka Trump was one of the daughters that he got from his second wife. So there was a report that was made that she had also become one of the biggest targets. She had also become one of the biggest targets. Now, people are so much wondering what's really going on. Could it be something that's related to what's happening with Iran? Could it be something that is so much getting manufactured with Israel? Could it be some of the nationalism or nationalists that are rising in the American Republic? There are so many questions about the life of President Donald Trump. Definitely, we believe that the life of the president is a little bit very precious. You might not be in a position to agree with him, but someone surviving almost 4 attempts at this age or at his age, it somehow affects his judgment. It somehow affects him on different fronts. So many people have come up to condemn what was done against the life of the presidency or against that very attempt. And everyone has been coming out to so much appreciate the wonderful security that was provided by the Secret Service. But before we get away from the United States of America, we also have to talk about what has been happening, most especially when it came to what we call the peace talks that they've been having with Iran. Over the weekend, Donald Trump actually, before the attempt, Donald Trump came up and said that the peace talks that were moving forward between Iran and Iraq, and the United States of America, are a little bit going to get done. He said that America is considering, I don't know if our producer can get something that Donald Trump posted on his Truth Social, talking about the resolutions that they were in a position to declare towards the peace deal that they are going to have with Iran. Now, for so long, Iran has been saying that for us, we don't want to have any more discussion with America, because America has always been working out of these discussions. America has always been working out of these discussions without having serious respect. You should understand, what you should remember, that even before the conflict, even before the war, America and Iran were having peace talks in Oman, in Muscat. They were having these discussions about the nuclear deal with Iran. Now, it was because amidst that America decided, instead of continuing with the peace talks, they chose to declare war or to attack Tehran or Iran, and they started shooting. Now, this goes back to the deal that America was in position to sign up with Iran in 2014. In 2014, President Donald Trump, actually, it was President Barack Hussein Obama. During that time, Obama was in position to give the Irans, or Iran or Tehran, a very fair deal. Now, the point is, Iran has always been saying that for them, they want to have what you call nuclear enrichment. Uranium enrichment. Uranium enrichment, it is something that can enable them to have what you call a nuclear weapon or a nuclear bomb. Now, Obama told them that, please, we are not allowing you to go past between 14 to 20% of nuclear enrichment, which was a deal that so much got respected by Iran. And there were a little bit of some good issues, a good relationship between the country. But that was Obama 2014, 2015. But after the emergence of Donald John Trump, he said, no, that deal is very fake. As America, we cannot declare our support. We cannot let our country have such a deal with a country called Iran. So when Trump came out, he rectified, he cancelled out, or he terminated that kind of arrangement, which made him to so much go pro-Israel and per the demands of Israel. Now, according to the deal that Trump has just been in position to put out, Trump says that America or the USA is going to so much pay for the reparations. The USA is going to pay for the damages that Iran has had, and they are going to pay $25 billion, most especially from the money that they've been in position to hold from the frozen assets. Now, Iran has so many frozen assets in the UK, in America, and most of the European countries. Now, their frozen assets have always been in position to get milked by the Western powers. Now, Trump says on that arrangement, America is willing to pay $25 billion to ensure that there are reparations. In other words, to make sure that the frozen assets of Iran are a little bit recuperated or a little bit recapitulated in that very kind of approach. 25 billion pounds for payment of the frozen assets of Iran. That was the first, idea that Trump came up with. And then also Trump said that we are going to ensure that we open the Strait of Hormuz. Now, the Strait of Hormuz has been blocked by America and then also blocked by Iran. Now, from the demands that Iran has been in position to put on table, that America should be in position to vacate or to leave or to give space to the blockade that has been done over the Strait of Hormuz. And Trump said, yes, we are willing to accept on that. And then Iran also put up another issue. The other issue was about leaving all pro-Iran forces and where they are. One of the countries that has been so much disturbed by this conflict is Lebanon, because Lebanon has a lot of fighters that are so much pro-Israel. I mean, that are so much pro-Iran. Iran has been supporting a lot of people, a lot of paramilitaries that are fighting against the liberation or the dominance of Israel in Lebanon. So Iran is saying that we should also be in a position to give them space. To give them space. We are talking about the Hezbollah. The Hezbollah have been so much fighting. They are fighting against the Israel's domination of Lebanon, most especially the southern eastern part of Lebanon. Now, Iran is also saying that we should also be in a position to accept and condone the operations of Hezbollah, and America should be in a position to vacate or to remove all their bases in areas where forces that are fighting on the side of Iran are. America is also willing to accept that. Now, the last bit of it, that is uranium. Iran says America doesn't have any say on our uranium. We don't need any idea. Any discussions about the uranium that we're having in our country, it's not for the Americans to decide. By the end of Saturday, Trump had accepted all these terms. Now, by the end of Saturday, Trump had accepted all these terms. And people are asking themselves, what is pushing Trump? What is pushing Trump to that wall? Why is it that Trump appears to be so much pushed on the wall? How come that Trump is accepting all these terms and conditions? Now, that was by the end of Saturday. But by the end of yesterday, Trump is almost changing himself. Now, some other players can begin. That is Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, the deal that is supposed to be had between Israel and Iran, sorry, the deal that's supposed to be done between the USA and Iran, the biggest power that doesn't always come in play is Israel. Yet Israel has a 100% say, most especially on the terms and the conditions that Iran wants within these areas. So people are asking themselves, Trump came out and declared, what has made Trump change his mind? Because by the end of Saturday night, there were issues, all those issues like I've just talked about, the payment in terms of the frozen assets of $25 billion, the vacation of the Strait of Hormuz, that the blockade that had been put up, the vacation of all military headquarters or military, operation grounds that had been established around in areas that are so much where we have groups that are fighting pro Iran are, and the discussion about uranium has also been out of this. But why is it that now Trump is changing himself? Now we are talking about uranium. As we speak, Iran has almost 500 kilograms of uranium. Now, this sounds a little bit very simple, but 500 kilograms of uranium are very, very powerful. You can be in a position to have between 15 to 20 nuclear bombs. Now, this is what's happening. We've always been talking about uranium here, but what is uranium? Now, uranium is a mineral. Uranium is a mineral that is so much enriched in so many countries, including Uganda here. The president of Uganda in 2015 was in a position to read a list of some of the minerals that we have here, and uranium is one of them. We have it that side of the west, most especially around in Mbarara, as you're moving in those deeper areas there. Uganda is one of the countries that has uranium. Uranium has two isotopes. Let's go back to a little bit of some chemistry. Uranium has two isotopes. One of them is uranium-235 and the other is uranium-238. Now, uranium-238 is the most common kind of uranium, but it's not that powerful because for it, it's already enriched to almost beyond 20%. Now, uranium-235 is the least common one, and by the time it is so much gotten out from the ground, it is almost 0.007% enriched. So what do we call enrichment? Enrichment is making uranium pure. So if you make uranium pure between 0 and 5%, you can be in a position to get this entire country powered, because it can be in a position to be used as a power source. Instead of using fossil fuels, we can be in a position to have uranium because it's used as power. At least by around 20%, by around 5% still, you can use it in chemicals. You can use it in medical substances. This is what they use when they are so much burning out the cancer. They use uranium as well. It's one of the isotopes that we use in medical facilities. Now, if you enrich uranium between 15 to 20%, that is big enough to power what you call a submarine. A submarine, you're talking about a very big vessel that moves deep into the waters. So by the time you see a submarine moving, most especially in the deep sea, beyond the Benthic Sea, that is uranium. Most of the powerful dreadnoughts or most of the powerful submarines are nuclear powered, but that enrichment goes to 20%. If you enrich uranium by 20%, you can be in a position to empower a submarine by almost 20%. What about when you go beyond that? Now, research has it that Iran has uranium that is enriched to almost 60%. Now, if uranium is enriched 60%, that is the hardest bit of it. Enriching it to a level of enriching it, this is uranium-235, not uranium-238. If you get it enriched to a level of beyond 60%, that's what you need for a nuclear weapon. Now, they are saying that Iran has 400 kilograms of uranium, which can be in a position to help Iran produce between 16 to 20 nuclear weapons. Now, there was discussion. They were saying that this uranium should be captured and be taken to Russia or to China. Mustafa came out and said, no, we are not taking our uranium out of this country. So what is really going to happen? Was it the pressure that came from Iran that made Trump to come up with the discussions and declarations, or it was a phone call that Netanyahu made towards Trump, and Trump was in a position to eat his words? Trump has always been changing his mind. Trump has always been changing mind. He has always been treating so many issues that are very controversial. But the attempt to his life, or the third assassination attempt, sends a lot of suspicions and mistrusts among the American governance system. And also, people are saying that probably it was because of him conceding to the terms of Iran, because that was like a game up. That was, if Trump had accepted on the terms and the conditions as they were so much aired by Iran, now that was America surrendering. But probably Netanyahu made a call, and by the end of yesterday, the communication was different. Trump was almost sending a warning again towards Iran. Yes, we are waiting to see what's going to happen as far as that conflict is concerned. You're still watching New Day on TV1. You're working with Dr. Samao Charles Cake. Let's go for a short commercial break and we shall be coming back with more stories.
TV1. See the difference.
Welcome back from the sports segment by Samdeji Kalyango. We appreciate that the Ghanas were in a position to be crowned as champions of the Premier League after that very long period of time. Yes, let's dive to the Far East and we are going to talk about Russia and Ukraine. Now, for the last month, I think the biggest story has been so much about how Ukraine is taking over Russia. Ukraine has so much built a lot of drone capability that has been in position to so much give Russia some hard time, to the extent that they were in position to hit Russia almost 1,385 times. Now that sounds a lot, that sounds a lot, most especially when you get to understand the capacity of Ukraine compared to the capacity of Russia. So definitely Russia is bigger militarily, economically, geographically, by far compared to what Ukraine has always been, having. But of course the Western media, I think for the past 3 weeks, they've been so much telling us that Russia is so much taken over. Actually, to the extent that when Russia was having their military parade at Kasky, Russia already celebrated a military parade in Kasky. I think they celebrated last week. The celebrations were a little bit narrowed down. Why? Because they were a little bit scared that the Ukrainians would be in position to attack them. But 3 days to the celebrations, Donald Trump, the president of America, he declared that Ukraine and Russia were going to have a ceasefire. This ceasefire was to respect Russia or to give Russia time to celebrate their military parade, or what they mean by winning over the war against Germany. During World War II, Russia was the first country that was in a position to defeat Germany. So they always celebrate that. They celebrate in Kasky, in Leningrad, and most of those areas. So last week, they were celebrating it. But the celebrations weren't as big as they've always been. Why? Because for the previous 3 weeks, Kiev or Ukraine has been very instrumental when it comes to the bombing or the throwing of drones or dropping of drones, most especially including in the Russian capital, that is Moscow. Now, to the extent that even Vladimir Zelensky has turned out to be one of the biggest exporters of drones in Europe. We've seen him visit Turkey, we've seen him visit Qatar, we've seen him visit Japan. He has been in position to move around the entire world, South Korea, telling them on how they can be in position to empower themselves using the drones that Ukraine has been in position to produce. Ukraine has been in position to produce a lot of drones. This is what has been a little bit very hard on the sides of Russians to ensure what we call, or what they call the special operation, because Russia, according to Putin, when they declared the war over Ukraine, they didn't call it a war. They called it a special military operation. This was launched almost 3 years ago. But you don't have to forget the first operation they did was 2014, where Russia was in position to go and take over Crimea. Now, like I've said for the last 3 weeks, Trump and the Western powers have so much been jubilant and celebrant to the extent that they've always been highlighting what Ukraine has been in position to do. Now, things have turned around. Last week still, we're in position to see Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, visiting his colleague or his friend Xi Jinping, the president of the People's Republic of China. And this was just 2 days after Trump's visit to China. Of course, when he came back, it seems he came back very, very sad, and he had to put on this KGB attitude. Now, 3 days ago, Ukraine was in position to hit Russia, the Russian territory that has been taken over, but it is a Ukraine territory, but right now it's a Russian territory in Luhansk rather. Now they sent a drone or drones, and they hit, and they killed 10 children. 10 school-going children were killed by Ukraine drones that were hit in Russia. Now, in response, Russia, for the first time since this special military operation started, Russia hit back. Russia didn't hit back with the drones that they've always been using. This time round, the war escalated. We have another escalation. Russia was in position to send what we call an intermediate nuclear bomb. Now, this is not a fully developed nuclear bomb, but they hit it, and they hit Kiev. Actually, they say that they hit 2 of them in Kiev, and things have turned upside down. Now, this is the biggest weapon Russia has ever used towards Ukraine in this kind of conflict. Now, it has made all European powers to come and condemn what Russia has been in position to do. But of course, when the Ukrainians have been hitting Russia, no one has been talking about it, including when they killed children. Just like how America hit a school in Iran and they killed almost 168 children. None of the Western powers condemned it. So even when Ukraine attacked a school and they killed 2 children, none of the Western powers did it. So Putin was like, okay, let me show you that I'm the king of the USSR. So he put on his KGB attitude and he hit. And this was very terrible. Now, the president of Ukraine was taken down in a bunker. But you don't have to forget, the bunker where Zelensky was taken, it was constructed by Russia. You don't have to forget that this was all the Soviet Union. So when this bunker got hit, when the intermediate ballistic missile was sent and then it hit, almost all cabinet ministers, all members of parliament, and including Zelensky himself, were put in a bunker. But I've just said, you don't have to forget that the bunkers that Ukraine is using right now, they were constructed by Russia during that time when Ukraine was still part of the Union of the Soviet Socialist Republics, or what you call the USSR. Now, things have not stopped there. In Belarus has closed its borders with Ukraine. Now, Belarus is one of the closest allies of Russia. Belarus is led by a gentleman called Alexander Luhansky. No, I'm forgetting the other name. Alexander Lukashenko, something like that. I can't pronounce that name right. Now, Lukashenko has been one of the greatest allies of Russia. And we saw him last week, visiting North Korea. Of course, he was delivering a message right there. He has been leading Belarus, that is Minsk, the capital of Belarus is called Minsk. He has been leading this country since 1999. He's also, just like Russia, is pro-Russia. Now, Belarus has closed their borders with Russia. Now, that is the same arrangement that Russia did in 2022 when they were launching this kind of mission. They first made Belarus close their borders with Russia, and they are doing it again. Now, almost all other European powers are a little bit scared. Now, they did not only hit them using ballistic missiles, but they also hit Kiev with almost 600 drones. Now, these kind of drones I've never seen before. I've never been seen before. So Russia is somehow escalating this kind of invasion. And people are saying that the special military operation is changing course. So the idea, Russia is now trying to take over the entire Kiev. Now, Russia has already taken part of Luhansk. Luhansk was part of Ukraine. Now it's occupied by Russia. Russia has taken over Donetsk. Donetsk is now part of Russia. Russia has taken over Crimea. It was part of Ukraine, now part of Russia. Russia has taken over Kazan, the Kherson, that part is also part of Russia. Russia has taken over Zaporizhzhia. Zaporizhzhia is also now part of Russia. Now all those territories, like I've mentioned, the Kherson, Zaporizhzhia, Donetsk, Luhansk, all those parts, I don't know if our producer can get that map, it's like that we can look at the eastern part of Ukraine that is all under the domination of the Russians. Now, Russia is also controlling what called the Sea of Azov. Now, Ukraine has access to water bodies, has access to two water bodies. It has access to the Black Sea down here, and they also have access to what called the Sea of Azov. Now, those are the two biggest water bodies that help Ukraine to so much carry out to trade with the neighboring countries, including Turkey, Greece, and other countries. But the Sea of Azov is right now under the control of the Russian troops. Now, the idea is Russia wants to take over Ukraine. Definitely, when Ukraine is taken over, the entire part of Ukraine is, when the Kiev is taken over, which is the capital, it's going to be very, very hard for Zelensky to continue upholding the conflict and the resistance that is putting up, which is going to be very, very, very unfortunate on the side of the Ukrainians. Now, like I've said, Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, Kherson, the Sea of Azov, Crimea, they are all under the Russian domination. And then they are also closing in from the other side of Lukashenko. That's the side of Belarus. They don't have any control. And the idea is they want to take over Kiev. And what shows that they are planning to take over Kiev, it's the preparations that are being done on the side of Belarus. Like I've said, even when they were declaring this special military operation in 2022, that is what happened as far as that. And the kind of weaponry, the kind of arms that Russia is using right now are a little bit very, very scary. So many countries are a little bit very uncomfortable. You don't forget as well that 2 weeks ago, a Russian Ukraine drone was in position to be seen in Estonia and Lithuania. Now, these two countries got affected by a Russian drone that went astray. But we don't have to take it like it went astray. Now, these are some of the powers that are so much trying to get into the European Union. People are saying that Russia was trying to show other countries that are a little bit very uncomfortable with getting into the orbit of Russia, that we can hit you as well. Because Estonia is a little bit very far, and then Lithuania is also a little bit very far. To the extent that even the Prime Minister of Lithuania had to resign. That's how, instrumental that kind of a mistake was. But the idea is Russia wants to take over Kiev, and also Russia wants to take over what you call Odessa. Now, Odessa is the biggest port. Almost 70% of the entire business in Ukraine is controlled at what we call Odessa. Now, it's a very big port. Now, when Odessa is taken over, they take over their access to what we call the Black Sea, and they take over the Ukraine access to the Sea of Azov. Ukraine is going to become a landlocked country. Now, Ukraine is one of the biggest food baskets in Eastern Europe. Most of the European powers are getting a lot of money, are getting a lot of their food from Ukraine, most especially wheat. Now, if you close Port Odessa, if it gets into the Russian control, in other words, it's going to make European countries starve. In other words, Putin is trying to let other European countries starve. Because if you take over Port Odessa, it means that the entire Ukraine is going to become landlocked. Even the other part of Belarus, like I've told you, Lukashenko cannot allow them to do any kind of operations because he's a pro-Russian leader. And for so long, they've been extending. They have a very working relationship. And then it's going to make Putin a very big boss around there. But the people in Ukraine are going to keep on starving, are going to seriously keep on starving. That is what is happening. So everyone is asking themselves, what is going to be the next chapter? But Russia had to give a justification. Like I've said, for the past 1 month, Russia's targets or Russia's invasions or attacks on Ukraine have been a bit so much lowered down. Russia has not been hitting. So the Western media and the Western people that so much support Zelensky have been so much in high gear. They've been praising Zelensky to the extent that he has been in position to visit different European countries and Asian countries, including Qatar, telling them on how they can beef up their security using the engineering systems that are so much designed by Ukraine, that is under Zelensky. But where does this leave him? You don't forget that between April, when the invasion of Iran started, America was in a position to give or to lift what we call a ban on what they had put on the Russian oil. In other words, America said that Russia shall be in a position to trade all its oil that has been locked up on different water bodies on the European continent. You know what happened? Russia did not go in for the bait because Russia realized that if the Strait of Hormuz is closed, The only alternative that European powers have, including France, Britain, Germany, and all that, for their sources of oil was Russia. And remember, these countries, most especially the countries that we just talked about, the big four countries in the European Union, including Italy, Britain, France, and Germany, they had put sanctions on Russian oil. In other words, they had all opted to get their oil from the Persian Gulf. That is including Oman, Kuwait, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Qatar. Now that the Strait of Hormuz got closed, it became a little bit hard for them to have a very serious source of oil. And one of the alternatives that they've been positioned to go in for is the Aliko Dangote refinery in Nigeria. Now, if you happen to look at most of the oil that Aliko Dangote is producing on the African continent is consumed by the European powers because their biggest source was Asia, most especially when they came up with the condemnations or sanctions against what was happening in Asia. In Russia when they came up with sanctions. So they were like, let's go to Asia. Now that the Persian Gulf is closed, most especially when it comes to the usage of the Strait of Hormuz, they don't have any alternative. The alternative they had was to come to Nigeria and have a good conversation with Aliko Dangote, irrespectiveness of first denied, because when Aliko Dangote was coming up with this refinery, they first said no. The oil that is being produced by Oil Dangote has a lot of sulfur. It cannot be used by Western countries because it is not pure. The level of purity is a little bit lower, but they don't have an alternative. That's why Aliko Dangote is turning out to be one of the greatest and the richest men on this planet. But in order to ensure that they also get an alternative from Russia, Trump said, okay, the sanctions that America had imposed on Russian oil goes off, up to 30th of June or 30th of July. You know what Putin did? He said, no, we are not selling any of our oil to European countries. Now, that's why you've been in a position to realize that there are sharp oil prices in most of the European powers. Most of the European powers have problems with their oil supplies. So that's what happened that Putin was in a position to use one of the most dangerous weapons. Now, there is also another weapon that Putin tested. Whenever I'm referring to Putin, I'm referring to the president of Russia. He tested a very serious weapon that has never been seen before, and they called it the Stamat. The Stamat is one of the biggest nuclear weapons that was tested by Russia 3 weeks ago. And the Western companies or the Western countries have called it the Devil 2 because of how strong it is. Because it has capacity of reaching beyond 5,000 kilometers. Now that's almost 3/4 of the entire world, because the entire world goes to around 445, something kilometers. But this kind of weapon that was tested by Russia, the so-called Stamat, or the Devil 2 rather, it was nicknamed by Western countries. It is something that also shook all the Western powers, and they were like, okay, we really have to understand what is happening on the side of Moscow. But the biggest story is Russia retaliated. That was after Ukraine hitting a school in Luhansk, in the side of Russia, that ended up killing almost 10 Russian school-going children. And of course, in the retaliation or in the revenge, Russia retaliated by using what called ballistic missiles that are never seen before. They don't only go with these ballistic missiles, they also use 600 drones that I've never seen before. And the idea is to either take over Port Odessa, and like I've said, Odessa is one of the biggest routes or ports that so much supply the entire Ukraine. They are not only aiming at taking over Odessa, they also want to take over Kiev, which is the capital that they've always been fighting for. They also want to take over at the other side of the eastern part, because they've been in position to talk to Alexander Lukashenko, the leader of Belarus, to ensure that they also close the border between Ukraine and Belarus. But you don't have to forget that Russia has already taken over states like areas like Kherson, Zaporizhzhia, Donetsk, Luhansk. They want to have access to the Black Sea, and they also want to have access to the Sea of Azov. That is what is happening. Zelensky was in position to get lifted out from the bunker yesterday, and things are not yet stable as far as the eastern part of Europe is concerned. In another story, in Today in History, we want to focus on the World African Day. Now, today, being the 25th of May, we remember the World African Day. Now, the World African Day is celebrated on the 25th of May, where all African countries celebrate it as the Day of the African Child. And why is it that we are celebrating it on this day? We are celebrating it on this day because we must be in a position to understand that this was a day when, this is the day when the entire the entire African countries were in a position to establish what we would call the Organization of the African Union. If you can be in a position, producer, can you post that image? Thank you so much. If you can look at that photo, those are some of the greatest pioneers. I can see Apollo-Milton Obote. You can see him behind there. Apollo-Milton Obote, if you move to the left, there is I can see Julius Kambarage Nyerere is over there. Julius Kambarage Nyerere is over there. And then in front here, a person who looks like a Muhima, that is Emperor Haile Selassie, the Rastafari, the leader of Ethiopia by then, because this was established in Addis Ababa. And then next to Emperor Haile Selassie, the Rastafari, there is Jomo Kenyatta. I guess that is Jomo Kenyatta right here with something in his hand. I'm forgetting the name that is given to that. So those are some of the prominent people that were in a position to ensure that the African Union is established with headquarters in Addis Ababa in 1963. But of course, the idea was to ensure that they established what's called the Organization of African Unity. By then, all African independent countries, all countries that were independent on the African continent, they were in a position to come together. There were 32 states right then out of the 55 African countries. By then, there were only 32 that were independent. So because of that, we commemorate that day. That was the day when the Organization of African Unity became instrumental, and it was fully launched with headquarters in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. And because of that, we celebrate this day as the Day of the African Child, when we commemorate the mindsets, the leaders that were in a position to see the future. That is Jomo Kenyatta, like you've seen there, Emperor Haile Selassie, that is from Ethiopia, the Rastafari, the last emperor. He led Ethiopia from 1932, yes, and then he was removed by a coup. He was removed by the soldiers in 1974. That is during the time, and then they were in position to establish the leadership of Haile Mariam Mengistu. Haile Mariam Mengistu led from 1974 up to 1985, and then from 1985 to 2011, Meles Zenawi, yes, if I'm not mistaken, 2001 or 2011, Meles Zenawi took over the leadership in there. So those are some of the prominent African leaders that we are in position to establish the African Union in 1963. But of course, there were ideas. The ideas of the establishment of the African Organization of the OAU were a little bit very instrumental. There were people that were supporting the idea, and then there were people that were against the idea. So that's why here we've always been talking about the Monrovia and the Casablanca group. Now, the Casablanca group, that was the group that was saying, no, we should have an independent Africa. We should go into what we call the United States of Africa. And the United States of Africa, what they were advocating for was to ensure that all African countries are established into a single one state with one leadership. Of course, that idea was pushed by Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, the Osajefo of Ghana, because he said in 1957, after Ghana becoming independent, he said the independence of Ghana is useless when the rest of African countries are still under the control of colonial rule. So that's the idea. For them, they were suggesting, like, let's go into a single state, and they call it the USA, or the United States of Africa. So people like Obote supported him, people like Julius Nyerere supported him, people like himself, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah Osajefo supported him, people like Gamal El Nasser supported him. But there were also people that were saying, no, the entire union of the African continent cannot be achieved. Why don't we go in for regional bodies? The regional bodies like the Organization of the African Union, the Economic Community of West African States, rather, the ECOWAS. Why don't we go for the East African Community? Why don't we go for the SADC, South African Development Corporation? Why don't we go for the COMESA, the Common Market of East Africa and South African states? Why don't we go for the SADC, for the COMESA, for the East African Community, and for the ECOWAS. Now, there were voices that were coming in that very level. But of course, they both failed to agree. The people from the Monrovia kind of mindset decided to take over, and they won. So that's why in 1963, the 32 African countries were in a position to establish what we call the Organization of the African Union, with headquarters in Addis Ababa. And then the rest of other countries that became independent were also in a position to follow. Uganda was already independent because we got independence in 1962. So Uganda was one of the pioneers of that. So in case we remember that day of the African child. Of course, how you define an African child depends on you and the kind of mindset that you really want to have about an African child. But this is a very big day. We should be in a position to get it celebrated and commemorated in respect to the forefathers that were in a position to see the idea and worked. You know, what would have happened, by the way, if the entire Africa was under one leadership? That's a very big question. It's $1 million question, that what should we be looking into another kind of Africa? Should we be having, you know, if maybe the all African countries got united under one leadership, how would Africa be? Where would this entire continent be now that the continent has 1.2 billion people, around that much people? How would Africa be if all African countries were in a position to get under one roof, or they were in a position to get all their heads under one thinking cap? That would have been very, very miraculous. We would not, definitely we can just talk about it, but we don't have any clear idea of what would have, But of course, the OAU is still in operation. It changed its name in 2001 from the OAU to the AU, from the Organization of the African Union to the African Union, with headquarters in Addis Ababa. As we speak, the president of Burundi, Evariste Ndayishimiye, is the president of the African Union. You were in a position to host him in Uganda here during the swearing ceremony of General Yoweri Kaguta Museveni. So today is the day we remember the day of the African child. But of course, like I've given the background, it is what we use. The background is about the commemoration or the establishment of the OAU in 1963 with the powerful gentlemen that I've just talked about: Emperor Haile Selassie, Jomo Kenyatta, Julius Kambarage Nyerere, Mapolo Micho Obote, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, Deosa Jeffo, Gamal El Nasser, and so many others, Nnamdi Azikiwe, and very many others like we've seen right there in the pictorial. Now, the last story, we shall come back to the continent. We shall come back to the country called Uganda. Now, the speakership race is up in high gears, and this race is coming in after the declaration that was made by the former Speaker of Parliament, the Right Honorable Anita Among, who said that she will not be in a position to run for the second term as the Speaker of the biggest house, or the legislature of Uganda. Now, the conversation, of course, came in after. Her allegedly of the crimes of the, a little bit of allegations that are going around that were sparked off by her access or purchase of the 3 billion car, the Rolls Royce. Yes, it was because of that the chairperson of the NRM so much influenced her. I don't really understand how out, but she came out and declared that she won't be in a position to run for the speakership. Now, this leaves us into a new question, but the new question as well was answered, that one of the prominent NRM leaders, or both, who has been acting as the State Minister of Defense, is going to run for the speakership. And then the deputy, who was a deputy of Anita Among, is coming in. Honorable Thomas Tayebwa is coming in as a deputy as well. And of course, the NRM SEC was in a position to endorse it. The Central Executive Committee of the NRM endorsed it. And one of the biggest power play or power centers, the PLOU, has also been in position to endorse it. And after an endorsement, we're in a position to see so many members of parliament that were elected for this term run to Mukono. That is where the house of the home of Honorable Jacob Oboth is on the Thanksgiving ceremony, or Thanksgiving mass that was held at his place. And, he's coming in for speakership. Now, there are so many questions about that. There are so many questions about that. Now that the SEC, of course, there are people that are coming in. The other parties are also bringing in some people to ensure that they also come in. But of course, we all know that the NRM has the biggest numbers. It has the biggest majority. Out of the 529 members of parliament, the NRM is almost having like 400. You know, definitely it's going to be a little bit easier for them to take over the speakership of this house again. But of course, we've had some people, some other voices that have been coming in, that have so much been brought in by other political parties, including the National Unity Platform. They brought in Pomwil, one of the biggest opposition leaders in the East, that is in Jinja. His name has been so much brought up to ensure that they offer support. They also come in and be part of the race as far as the speakership is concerned, but definitely we don't think he has chances to take over, most especially that NUP doesn't even have a bigger number, of course, you know, but of course you never know. And then we've also seen some other people coming in, but the fact that the NRM has endorsed Jacob Oboth, and then Thomas Tayebwa is coming in for deputyship, definitely we believe that the House is now going to be in charge of 2 men. Yeah, for quite some time, I think for around 3 terms of 4 terms, we've had women taking over this house, and one of them was the Right Honorable Rebecca Kadaga, and then after her, we're in a position to have Jacob Olanya coming in, and then now we had Right Honorable Anita Among coming in, and then it is now going back into the hands of the men, that is Thomas Tayebwa and then Jacob Oboth. So you can see the pictorials right there. The president was in a position to host them, to have some kind of serious discussion to see how the NRM can take over this kind of leadership moving forward. Wow, I really want to appreciate you for moving out with me since we started this. Yeah, we started by talking about what's happening in Iran. We went to Iran, we went to Russia, we went to Senegal, where we had a conversation about Diomaye Faye, Diomaye Faye, after firing Sonko and the PASTEF. The party is having a lot of issues. We went to the bullets that were shot in the White House, which was a 3rd attempt towards the elimination of the life of the American president. And then we went into Russia using ballistic missiles over Kiev. And then we've had the Today in History where we talked about the Day of the African Child. And then we are summarizing everything with, with the speakership race in Uganda. Thank you so much for watching New Day. You're still watching TV1. That has been the case for New Day. It happens every day from 7 to 9 a.m. every day from Monday to Friday. So we still have so many programs that are coming. Next, we are going to go into skilling Uganda. That has been the day with Dr. Samuel Charles representing. Thank you so much. See you tomorrow, same place. You're still watching TV1. See the difference.